Hi everyone, welcome. This is our last event for 2020 in the Living Heritage Sharing Series. My name is Jean Lançon. I advise the Vice President Research at the U of R regarding the Living Heritage Research Cluster. Over the past few months, with the help of the Humanities Research Institute, we created this series to develop research and partnerships around living heritage. So with this series, we hope to bring people together and to offer a chance to researchers, those who run programs, and those who are simply interested in living heritage across the province to learn more about the work that's being done here. So we're alternating between university and community presenters to offer a variety of perspectives and to help each of us deepen our understanding of what living heritage and intangible cultural heritage are and can be. So I want to acknowledge that I'm hosting this event on the traditional territory of the Nihayawak, the Anishinaabe, and the Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota, as well as on the traditional homeland of the Métis, which is also Treaty 4 territory. The U of R and many of you also have a presence on Treaty 6. I also want just to note that this meeting is being recorded and will be shared on the U of R's YouTube channel, just with the speakers portion of the meeting. So our presenter today for this session is Carol Lafayette-Boyd. I'm very excited to be able to have her speak today. Carol has been active with the Saskatchewan African Canadian Heritage Museum board since 2005. She currently serves as its executive director. She's a grandmother of 3 and great-grandmother of 2. Carol is the family historian and has been working on her genealogy since 1982. She's a board member with the Bob Adams Foundation and For the Love of Matthew. She represents the province for the Canadian Masters Athletics as well. She attends Gateway Christian Fellowship Church, where she volunteers in the toddler room. She has lived and worked in the US and Canada as a clerk, nurse, and social worker. She's trained as a psychiatric nurse and was a registered social worker. Carol retired in 2005 after 33 years with the Saskatchewan government in social services and corrections and public safety. Carol is a master's track and field athlete, having taken up competition at age 50. She is an inductee in the Regina Sports Hall of Fame and Canadian Masters Athletics Hall of Fame. She was chosen in 2018 World Masters Athletics overall female Masters athlete and runner-up to Best Female Jumper. So she can contribute quite a bit. She does contribute quite a bit to various aspects of collective life here in the province. It's wonderful to have her today. Just a bit of housekeeping. I'll be hosting the session, keeping everybody's microphones off. You can, of course, help me with that yourselves. If we have some quality issues with the call, I might also shut off some cameras. But you're welcome to keep your cameras on if you want. I encourage you to ask your questions through a chat function during the presentation if you want to remember them. But we'll let Carol present first, then we'll have a Q&A period afterwards where we can have more of a dialogue. So that is enough from me. I am happy to turn it over to Carol. We'll have a presentation, and then, yeah, as I said, a bit of time to speak afterwards. Thanks, Carol.
Okay. Thank you so much, Jerome, and thank you everyone for being here to listen to me speak about the living heritage here in Saskatchewan. So I have about 29 slides, and so I'll shut my video off, and so I can read some of my notes without you having to see me moving my face about, and be really open to questions at the end. Okay, so here I go. Okay, my talk is called Importance of the Past, Present, and Future. And for that, I guess what's important to me is that, especially for our young people, to know where they've come from, what we have been through, what we've tested, what we've survived. And I think that the importance of the past and present is for a good future. So this picture here, the one on the left, is from my family farm. It was before I was born. My grandfather used to hire people to come up from the States to help with the harvesting. And on the right are my great-grandchildren. So first I'll talk about Sachem. And SACM was founded in 2002. However, it wasn't incorporated till 2004. And we sort of look at our anniversary as 2005 because that was our first event. And at that time, we had Jean Augustine, Canadian educational administrator and an advocate for social justice and politician, was our first guest speaker. But I was looking up on the internet about her, and one of the things that I found very interesting is that she admitted publicly that she has no African heritage. So Barbara, I'm going to talk to you about that after, because I'm not sure what that was about. Our mission for the Saskatchewan African Canadian Heritage Museum is to preserve and celebrate the heritage of people of African ancestry in Saskatchewan. And we've had some projects that I think are quite interesting. Our book, which was based on Dr. Shad, and I see that Anne-Marie is here from Melford. If you have any questions about Dr. Shad, she'll be able to answer them better than I will. And then our honoring tree, that's in the, it's out in the Wascana Park, and I don't know if many of you have seen it, but it was put there in recognition of SACM's centennial celebration. It was because of the settlement of the people of African ancestry that came to Saskatchewan in 2010. There was a whole group that came from, that did come from Oklahoma, although my family came from in 1906 from Iowa. And what I did was I found it interesting to look at the census, because a lot of people don't know that people of African ancestry have been in Saskatchewan. They've been here before the turn of the century. And I think even in I guess it would have been 6 years back, it would have been 1896. I think there was one man that was listed in the census that was working for the Northwest Mounted Police, a cook. But what's interesting here is that 1901, there were 6 people of African descent in Saskatchewan, and there were 70 in Manitoba. The 1906 census, which my family was in Regina, did not show racial origin. And then in 1911, there were 311 in Saskatchewan, but Alberta had 765, and British Columbia had 111. And what's interesting about British Columbia is that people came there in 1858 from San Francisco. So I didn't even know about that, but that's one of the things that's interesting about being with the Saskatchewan African Canadian Heritage Museum, is finding out all of these things. And in 1916, there were 497 in Saskatchewan and 1,000 in Alberta. And so that would have been all of the people, because there was over 200 families, I think, that came in 1910. And now Manitoba was up to 279. And then in 1921, we lost people, 338. Alberta had lost some too, but many had increased in Manitoba. And I think part of that was because of the railroad of many Blacks going to to Winnipeg and Edmonton and Calgary to work on the railroad. In 1926, there were 308. Now, the interesting thing about the 1916 census, our last name being Lafayette, we were registered as French. So these statistics are not quite all accurate. That was a picture of my grandparents in that right-hand corner. I just wanted to show you this census here. And this one is a 1901 census, before Saskatchewan was a province. And this is in Lindsay, the Lindsay family in East Assiniboia, wherever that was. It was riding in Saskatchewan, and until 1907, they redistributed, and it became Assiniboia, Quappel, and Salt Coats riding. So I think they were in the Assiniboian area, actually. And the other interesting census is a 1921 census, which showed a family in 1910 had come from the West Indies. So people had been coming from everywhere for some time. So I just wanted to tell you where the people settled when they came up from 1906 to 1910 anyway, or and some were 1912. I think the one in Piapot was in, she came in 1912. But there was Kinistino and Melfort. That's where Dr. Shadd came, Alfred Shadd. He was a teacher first. Regina, Prince Albert, and then the most group came near Maidstone to the Eldon district, and that's where they settled the what they call the Shiloh people. They also settled in Battleford and North Battleford, Prelate, and Rosetown, where my family settled. But the interesting thing is when my great-grandmother from Oklahoma came in 1910, it showed on the border crossings that she was going to Maidstone, I think it was, or North Battleford. But she ended up in Alberta. There was a settlement there also in Amber Valley. And it was a big settlement of Black people. So that's, but then in 1916, she was gently removed, I don't know if gently removed from the Amber Valley and moved to North Battleford as her husband had been kicked in the stomach and passed away, and they removed her from that area. Then this here is Dr. Alfred Schmitz and Gail Marie, I called you Anne Marie. Gail Marie was very helpful in helping us find all out about Dr. Alfred Schmitz. He was born in 1869 in Ontario, Canada. He went to Kinistino in 1896 to teach, went back home and got his medical degree in Ontario in 1898. And one of the stories that I didn't find out about Dr. Shadd until 1984, when I worked with another social worker who told me about Dr. Shadd. And he said that when Dr. Shadd arrived, he wasn't, some of the people there didn't want him to be their doctor. So he was just a pediatrician, not a pediatrician, just worked with the animals and the Aboriginal people until one man of European descent became very ill. And Dr. Shadd saved his life, and then he became a very important person. In 1901, he was a political candidate for the Northwest Territory. He was a doctor in Melfort from 1904 to 1915. And he was a farmer. He raised horses. He was a veterinarian. He was a journalist. He had a newspaper. He was a politician, and he owned a pharmacy. But he developed appendicitis in 1915, and he wasn't able to get medical attention he needed, and died in Winnipeg. Because of Dr. Shadd, we had a children's book written. What's interesting about this is not a true story, but it's based on Dr. Shadd, and we looked at we called it the story of Ujima, and that is something Barbara might want to discuss with us, because it's based on what we call is the I'm trying to think of the word, Kwanzaa, because we celebrate Kwanzaa on December 26th, which is an African American celebration that looks at the different aspects of Kwanzaa. And we'll talk more about that. I want to give you more history about Saskatchewan. There were baseball teams in Saskatchewan that were, some of them were all Black baseball players, and some of them were not. But we have some fact sheets on these that we can give you more information about them. There was a team in North Battleford. There was a team in Rosetown in Saskatoon. The team in Rosetown didn't last long because there was a riot there when one of the Cuban players got mad at another player and chased him across town. I don't remember this. I think I was born when this had happened. And because some of the players used to come to our home, as we were the only Black family in the city. And but he ran into in someone's house in the neighborhood and grabbed a knife and chased the other fellow about town, and they called it the Rosetown riot. And I think that was the end of the baseball team in Rosetown. This is our honoring tree that's in Wascana Park, and hopefully some of you has seen it. We try to have a celebration around it every year. We started out by having what we called a walk, run, and roll a run, walk, and roll, and but not many people showed up for it. And but it was one way to recognize that and remember the people that came before us. And the Shiloh Baptist Church is another. This is where the people that came in 1910, and they built this church in 1911, and it was last used in 1945. In 1991, it was designated as a provincial heritage property. And in 2018, it was designated as a provincial heritage property. And we didn't get to celebrate it until 2019. And there were, I don't remember the exact number, but there were several, I think there was over 60 descendants that came back to recognize this being a provincial heritage property. And so the provincial government left us a plaque that said in 1910, 12 families founded Saskatchewan's first and only African-American farming settlement in the rural municipality of Eldon. These families and others that followed came seeking land and freedom from the racial segregation of their native Oklahoma. In 1911, they built this simple one-room, hewed log meeting house that served as a place of worship and community gathering. The Shiloh Cemetery was established in 1913 as a place for their traditional burial customs. Despite racism that also existed in Canada, these African-American pioneers persevered and became respected members of the community. They are still remembered as the Shiloh people after this rustic log church where they once worshiped. Now, in 1911, I don't know if many of you are aware, and there was a book written called Deemed Unsuitable by Bruce Shepard. But in 1911, the federal government were going to try to have it recognize that people of African ancestry were no longer welcome in Saskatchewan, as they were deemed unsuitable because of the weather and whatever else. Fortunately, it didn't go through, but I think what it caused was many people to go back to Oklahoma or back to the states where they came from. So now I want to take you to the Lafayette lineage, and what this is. This man is James Armistead. They actually had a picture of him. And James was a slave. He was born in either 1748 or anywhere to 1761. And when the American Revolution started, he asked his master, William Armistead, if he could go and fight for the Americans in the American Revolution. Now, of course, many of you probably know more about the history because I never did care much about it, about how the British told the Americans, or told the slaves, that if they fought for them, they would receive their freedom. So James Armistead, he worked for the Americans and worked under General Lafayette, but he was a double spy, and he went into the British camp. And he did end up getting information from General Cornwallis that some ships were coming in. He relayed that to General Lafayette, and as a result, the Americans won the war. James went back to being a slave under William Armistead, and General Lafayette wrote a letter to the Virginia legislature before 1790 and suggested that they should give James his freedom, as he had helped them win the war. And the Virginia legislature, they did give him his freedom and paid his master $300 for his freedom. And James went, at that time, took the name James Armistead Lafayette. Now, what's interesting about that, when I was a youngster, my dad always told us we got our name from General Lafayette, but I just assumed that General Lafayette was a slave owner, and that's how he got the name. And so I never did ask my dad, why did he say, when a friend across the street asked me, what was your ancestry? I said, we were slaves. And my dad said, no, Carol, we were free. And I thought, oh, Dad, he's embarrassed to say that we were slaves. And I never did ask him what he meant. And my dad passed away in 1988, so I never got the opportunity to find out what he was talking about. And about 1994, a co-worker left a magazine on my desk, a military magazine, that told the story of James Armistead Lafayette. And when I looked at this picture, I knew he was mine because my dad and uncle looked like him. I think you'll see some pictures later on about that. And so I think that's just a wonderful genealogy there. So what we have is James Armistead Lafayette, an unknown person. I can't find the connection. I found a fairy Lafayette who's through other people, who is the father of a Lemuel Lafayette. And Lemuel Lafayette's grandson, or great-grandson, looks exactly like my dad. He had sent me a picture of himself, and we were having a family reunion, and I took the picture to the family and I said, which member of the Lafayette brothers do you think this is? And they looked at me and like I was crazy and said, well, it's Dad, of course. So I do believe that that fairy was Edward's dad. Edward was born in 1847 in Norfolk, Virginia. And he showed up in the 1870 census in Iowa. And Edward, in 1925, after his wife had passed away, he came to Canada with where my grandfather was living. And I think that's where my dad probably found out some of the stories. But he died, and when he died, on his death certificate, my grandfather, Louis Lafayette, wrote, they were supposed to put the names of the father and mother of the deceased person. And Louis wrote the names of his father and mother, who were Edward and Louisa Lafayette. So that's how we're having so much trouble. In 1906, they came from Iowa. And this picture, I'm not sure who all these are, but the very tall man is my father. So that had to have been taken in the 1920s somewhere. But that is my grandmother beside him and my grandfather. And I'm not sure, I could figure it out if I looked close enough. So Louis, Helena, Ernest, and Goldie arrived in Regina in 1906. There was a story that Louis had sent money for land in Regina, but when he arrived, no one reported receiving the money. And they lived on North Winnipeg Street. And apparently my dad used to tell his grandchildren when he would drive them in his truck down Winnipeg Street, that shack over there is where I was born. From 1908 to 1911, my grandfather, then since he didn't own land in Regina, decided to travel to the McGee, Herschel, Anglia, Fisk area to homestead. And he homesteaded on this section 1/2, south 1/2, section 9, township 30, range 17, west of the 3rd meridian is where he settled. And in 1911. So these are just some family pictures of the harvesting that went on out there. And there is my dad on the left, the Uncle Ernest, who was born in the United States. His brothers, that's his mother there. She had an interesting history too, because her parents died when she was young, and she was adopted by a family in Iowa. And I have been able to find her mother. And my father said that his grandmother was a red-haired Irish woman, but the woman I found is not a red-haired Irish woman. So I'm not sure about that. But I have a whole lot of interesting stories to tell about the family of that. My grandmother died at the age of 49 in childbirth with their 13th birth. And this is my dad and mom. They were married in 1932 out there on the farm, I think at my grandfather's house. There, Carl and Rose. This is another story you should know, is that my mom's grandmother raised her. Right? She came from Oklahoma, and she's the one that was kicked out of Alberta and living in North Battleford. And my parents lived near the homestead, and they had 8 children, all born on the farm, except for the second child, who was born in June and was able to get to the farm. But the story about my mom, because she was lived in North Battleford, where there were more Black people, what would happen with like my dad, there were 6 brothers and there were 4 girls. For any of them to marry, if you wanted to stay black, keep the black, marry a black person, you had to go to Maidstone or North Battleford to find a spouse. And so my dad, there were 3 of the brothers found their spouses from the Shiloh people or in the North Battleford, and 2 of the women found their spouses. My youngest uncle, he moved to Alberta when he was young, and he found a spouse from the people that had gone to the Alberta settlement. So after my mom passed away in 1955, my dad and the youngest ones of us, we came back to Regina. So here's some more family photos. These were all the men there with my grandfather. And I don't know if you can see it clear enough, but I see the resemblance of Lewis to James Armistead Lafayette. Some other information for you. In World War II, my uncles, Glenn and Earl, served in World War II. My uncle Glenn could only work as a cook, and neither one of them did talk about what it was like, although my son apparently did talk to Uncle Earl about how difficult it was being in the Army as a Black person in World War II. This was our first family reunion in 1970. There were 99 of us there, so the majority of the people in this picture are the neighbors that from out in that area that came. And this is from our next reunion in 1982. And that's all that my oldest aunt had passed away by this time. She passed away in 1977. So my Uncle Ernest had moved to BC. We lived in Regina. My Uncle Homer, Glenn, and Earl, they all were on the farm. Uncle Danny was in Edmonton, and the 2 aunts on the left were in Edmonton. And my aunt Muriel had married a traveling American preacher and had moved to the States, and that's where she was. This here is a reunion we had in Edmonton, because most people now live in Edmonton and Alberta. So, and that group, there was probably only half of that could have been there. That was in 2010. This is a picture of us 8 children in 2012 when one of our grandnieces got married. We got a chance to take a picture of all of us. So that's us, and we all look alike. So people definitely get us sisters mixed up, and their brothers too. My brother Ed has now passed away. He passed away last year. He's the one in the blue. Now this is my mother's side, the Jamerson side. Hester Jackson, I believe, was born in the 1700s in Alabama. Fanny was born somewhere, I'm not sure, and I think wherever she was born, but she did end up in Texas. Texana, my great-grandmother, is the one who came to Canada. She was born in about 1876. But when she was born, no, I'm sorry, not 1867, the Civil War had been over for 2 years, but in Texas, they hadn't told her group, wherever she was, that she was not a slave. And she had scars on her back from being beaten with whips, and had been treated as a slave for a long time. And I think that's maybe one of the reasons that she was kind of harsh in her raising of children. Now, my grandmother Mary, she didn't come up with the whole family in 1910. All the kids came with Texana, except for Mary. She was married at the time, and I assumed that she had probably crossed the border illegally, and because I couldn't find her in the border crossings until a couple of years ago. I did find her. She crossed the border in New York, and what we discover is that the children who thought they were born in Canada, one of the children, she was actually born in the United States. And my mother, that's another different story that I can tell because most of the people are not around anymore. But my grandmother's husband left in 1914 to go back to the United States. I thought he had joined the Canadian Army, but he had joined the American Army, I've discovered. And he went back, leaving his 3 children in the care of Mary. And somehow my mother was born in December of 1915. And so my grandmother Mary, the story goes that she was going to give my mother to the gypsies. And what she did was, I don't know what my grandmother did because we didn't know her very well, but her 3 older children, she left with one woman in Edmonton and put my mother in another home in Edmonton, and apparently was going to give her to the gypsies. So Mary's brother, Robert, who also was in, you'll see a picture of him later, he went to the home of the 3 children and said he'd like to take them to visit their baby sister. He went to the home of my mother and said he would like to take the children to the park. And what he did is he put them on the train to Amber Valley to be raised by my grandmother, Texana. So that's kind of how that was the only relationship that we really had with groups of Black people, as our families were the only one, the members of my family of the living in the white community. And there's a couple of stories that I find kind of interesting. My youngest uncle, when apparently the people from the Shiloh group would get together with my family once in a while. And the first time he saw all those Black people, he was afraid. And I thought, now how can this be? Because they not have mirrors, or they don't look at each other. But the interesting thing is, when we moved to Rosetown, a group of people did come down from North Battleford and probably Maidstone. And my sister saying how she was afraid when she saw all these Black people. I really don't understand it. I never had any of those experiences. Next. Okay, there. I guess Hester was born in Mississippi, and Fanny was in Alabama, and Grandma Texana was in Texas, and Grandma Mary in Texas, and then my mom born in Edmonton. Okay, so in 1910, what do I have here? Just a telling again about Edmund and Texana arriving from Oklahoma, crossing the border in Manitoba with 6 of their children. But the interesting thing is they were Jamisons when they left Oklahoma. However, their name became Jamerson, as no one could read or write, and that's what the border people wrote down. They settled in Amber Valley, my great-grandmother did, and then North Battleford. And this is Texana and Ed. We always were told that we had the Cherokee blood in us, but now we haven't been able to find it on any side there. This is the attestation paper of my great uncle Bob, who rescued my mother and children. He went into World War I, and I guess how he got there is he had stabbed his wife because he was angry at her, and she lived. But instead of putting them in jail, they sent them off to the army. So some of these stories are different to tell. So my final thing is just what inspires us. I want to speak about Martin Luther King, what he said. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, we have already come. 'Twas grace that brought us safe this far, and grace will lead us home. When we allow freedom to ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and city. And what else inspires us is the past is to be respected and acknowledged, but not to be worshipped. It is our future in which we will find our greatness. And that is the end of, I guess, thank you for the opportunity to share.